Now, I'm actually going to start this video by quickly talking about a scene from the first Matrix movie, and not just because it's a great movie, but because it's going to have relevance to the topic of this video. Anyway, at one point during the Matrix, Neo meets a woman called the Oracle who is essentially clairvoyant or can see things before they happen. And right after they first meet in the kitchen of the Oracle's apartment, she tells Neo out of nowhere to not worry about the vase. To which a confused Neo then looks around, only to bump into said vase, knock it to the floor, and watch it break. Neo then asks how she knew that was going to happen, to which the Oracle replies, "What's really going to bake your noodle later is, would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything?" And at this point, considering the title of the video, I think most of you are, like the Oracle from the Matrix, seeing where I'm going with this. If Luke Skywalker never goes into Ben's hut in the middle of the night and momentarily contemplates killing him, going so far as to ignite his saber, do we still get Kylo Ren? Now, the answer to that might seem like an obvious yes. I mean, if one misunderstanding between Luke and Ben, albeit a very egregious one, led Ben Solo to turn to the dark side, well, then there was probably issues there before with Ben that Luke was noticing. After all, there was a reason Luke went looking into his mind in the first place, and I don't think it was because he was expecting to see happy, pleasant things there. But therein lies a problem. The fact that Luke does peer into Ben's mind, and does it while he's asleep as to not alert him to the fact that he's doing it, pretty much confirms that Luke expected to find something very wrong there. And if that's the case, one really does have to wonder what exactly Luke saw there and why it shocked him so much that he contemplated killing his nephew, even briefly, to avoid what he saw from coming to pass. Again, Luke should have been fully prepared to see some bad stuff there if he was convinced he needed to look in the first place. And you might say I'm trying to nitpick the movie right now, but a lot of people have asked me to really start to analyze The Last Jedi, and that's what I'm trying to do here. Because this is actually one of the most important moments in all of Star Wars, and certainly the most important to this particular trilogy. Because what happens in that hut between Ben and Luke is the crux of the whole sequel trilogy. It's the moment that is responsible for pretty much everything else that's happening. And whether you like the idea of what happened in that moment or not, in terms of importance to the saga, it's on par with Vader telling Luke he's his father, or Anakin cutting off the hand of Mace Windu to save Palpatine. I mean, think about it. This scene or moment is essentially the end of Return of the Jedi in reverse. Because in Return of the Jedi, Luke almost struck down Vader but stopped himself. And in so doing, he finally became a Jedi and, in a sense, destroyed Darth Vader and brought Anakin Skywalker back to the light. However, in The Last Jedi, when Luke almost strikes down his nephew and stops himself, this leads Luke to stop being or believing in the Jedi eventually, and he ends up destroying Ben Solo and creating Kylo Ren. Again, the exact opposite of the end of Return of the Jedi. And it's of course completely up to you to decide whether that's brilliant storytelling, the worst moment in all of Star Wars, or somewhere in between. However, what troubles me the most about this very monumental moment in Star Wars is the complete lack of context around it. And I dare say what troubles a lot of fans about this is that we have zero idea what transpired before this or what ultimately led Luke to look into Ben's mind. Was he having issues with Ben before this? And if he was, did he really need to look into his mind to have it confirmed? And why would Luke, a Jedi Master, so easily be overcome by visions of the future when he, hopefully anyway, should have learned from Yoda so many years ago that always in motion the future is, and that what he was seeing wasn't guaranteed to happen? Another troubling part about this revelation is what immediately followed. After the incident in the hut, Ben apparently convinced half of Luke's other students not only to turn away from the teachings of the Jedi, but to help slaughter the other students and go full dark side. And if these other students became the Knights of Ren, which I think is a pretty good assumption, why did none of them wield lightsabers in The Force Awakens? I mean, Kylo clearly made himself a new red saber. Why didn't the other students do the same, or just use their green or blue Jedi sabers? Maybe none of them had lightsabers yet, sure, but something tells me that it would have been towards the top of their to-do list after going to the dark side. It seemed to be at the top of Kylo's after all. But perhaps the saddest part of all this, and what troubles some fans the most who really didn't like this revelation, is it is implied that Luke utterly failed on all levels of training his students. I mean, if Luke didn't sense or do anything about the darkness in Ben till he was literally at the tipping point, and if half his students were willing to follow Ben once he turned, just what in the hell was Luke doing? How did the guy who could project an image of himself across the galaxy not see or sense how horribly wrong everything was going with his students until he looked into Ben's mind one night? And if he was sensing it, which again is implied since he looked, did he need to even look in the first place? especially by going into Ben's hut in the middle of the night while he was sleeping, where things could, and did, go horribly wrong, and were misunderstood by Ben. Okay, now going back to the initial question, what if Luke never looked in the first place? Was this, in a sense, a self-fulfilling prophecy? What if Luke going into that hut in the first place was what was ultimately responsible for the future he saw? What if at this point in time Ben was just very conflicted, and Luke was going into the hut at night to speak to him about it? And when he found Ben sleeping there, he decided to peer into his mind and saw this horrible future that, again, only happens if Luke peers into his mind in the first place. This might then explain Luke's quick, rash reaction, since he really hadn't prepared himself to do what he did and see what he saw. And though I'm not sure how I feel about this idea one way or the other, there is some evidence to back up this idea that Ben was still very conflicted at this point, and what Luke was seeing was a future he was creating by looking. And that's because in The Force Awakens, we hear Ben confessing to the helmet of Vader that he's again feeling the pull to the light, implying that even after all he's done, he is not fully committed to the dark side, or become what Luke no doubt saw in his mind. Which then means Luke should have probably been able to feel conflict in Ben when he looked into his mind, instead of seeing nothing but darkness. Especially when you keep in mind, Luke once saw conflict in the mind of Darth Vader, who was far more consumed by the dark side than Ben could have ever been at this point. So I tend to believe what Luke was seeing wasn't the darkness currently in Ben, but what unleashing it, which he was responsible for, would ultimately lead to. And I think one of the reasons so many were upset about the way Luke was handled in this movie wasn't because he wasn't perfect or that he wasn't exactly what they wanted him to be, but it's because of the implied utter failing on his part, on so many levels, without any sort of real explanation as to how it all went so horribly wrong. Everything seems to point to the fact that Luke was clueless as to how to train Jedi, again when you factor in half his students joined with Ben, and that he was absent-minded about the fragile nature of Ben's psyche, until it was too late and he'd done something, well, stupid, by sneaking into Ben's hut in the middle of the night and looking into his mind. And whatever led to this moment may not have been something the movie had time to elaborate on, but one I feel perhaps it should have found a way to nonetheless. And then, the tragedy of Luke completely losing his way and giving up on the Jedi and pretty much life in general is exasperated by the fact that Leia, his twin sister, who has led an equally tragic life, if not more so when you really think about it, has never wavered and remained strong and committed throughout the years. And though I don't think many have a problem with that, because it seems befitting of her character, the simple truth is Leia is the exact same character she was 30 years ago. Even her story arc in The Last Jedi is almost identical to the one from the previous trilogy, when you consider she's mainly just dealing with an arrogant, hot-headed pilot that she cares about. The only real difference would be it was a romantic interest with Han, and more of a motherly concern with Poe. Now, one of my real hopes for Episode 9 is that it will give us some context to just how and why Ben fell, and why and how Luke failed so miserably, though I unfortunately don't actually see that happening. Sure, we will almost certainly learn more about Luke's 30 years and how it all went so wrong in the other sources of canon, but that doesn't help those who just watch the movies. And I know a lot of people love what they did with Luke in this movie, and they don't really feel like they need any more backstory behind it, while others are upset that they did this to Luke without a damn good explanation. The problem is, though, that, as I said before, this is the most important moment of this entire trilogy, hands down, and we know nothing about it. When Luke learned Vader was his father, which contradicted what we had learned in the previous movie, the next movie, Return of the Jedi, went out of its way to have a scene where the Force Ghost of Obi-Wan explained to Luke that what he had told him was true from a certain point of view. And in many respects, the entire prequel showed us exactly why Anakin made the fateful decision he did to turn on Mace Windu and save Palpatine. Now, though, Luke not only made a horrible decision, but we really don't know why he made it or why it sent Ben spiraling down the dark path. And other than assuming that everyone changes after 30 years, except for Leia apparently, we don't really have a good explanation as to why Luke turned from everything he had known, turned from his friends and family, and let a monster he had created run loose in the galaxy. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. If the movie had given more context to the change in Luke, do you think you would have been more accepting of it? Would Episode 9 delving into it a bit help in your opinion? Or is the story fine as is and it doesn't need further explanation? Let me know in the comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.